Hi, I'm Julie Vano. I'm the research director at the Aspen Global Change Institute, and I'm a PCC alum, and I'm excited to talk with you today about perspectives on where the rubber hits the road. So when we do science and it intersects with decision making, what can that look like? I've been really fortunate throughout the years to work closely with water managers at public utilities and in federal agencies, and I'm going to share some examples there. Work that I've done in close collaboration with Jeff Arnold at the Army Corps of Engineers while I was at the National Center for Atmospheric Research, and then also work that I've done with the Lorna Cates and the Water Utility Climate Alliance. A lot of those folks listed here, kind of an ongoing project, and working with a host of other water managers and climate and hydrology researchers throughout the US to make this work possible. So I love doing the science. I'm a hydrologist, but what brings me to work every day is this motivation that we can make better, more resilient choices through better engagement between scientists and decision makers. And I think I really love this analogy from David Bihar at San Francisco Public Utilities Commission of the scientist decision maker relationship. We're two very different species, but we coexist in the same ecosystem, and over time can really develop a symbiotic relationship. And it's working on those relationships and supporting innovations and solutions and new pathways to collaboration that drives a lot of my work. And I'm going to share 3 different examples. One, looking at climate change information guidance, so ways to increase the utility and appropriate use of climate information, work supported by the Army Corps of Engineers. Another, leading practices in climate adaptation, supported by the Water Utility Climate Alliance. And then a third one, looking at actionable attribution science with the American Meteorological Society Water Resources Committee. So the first one is really largely motivated by a statement such as this. So this is the American Society of Civil Engineers in 2015 saying that engineering practices and standards associated with these facilities must be revised and enhanced to address climate change to ensure they continue to provide acceptably low risks of failures in functionality, durability, and safety over their service lives. So this notion that money, livelihoods, and lives are at stake, and water managers and engineers who work in this space really get that. And so they want to understand how they can evaluate their future risk and think about climate change. And so the question becomes, what information should they use? This is a really great illustration from Ken Nowak, who is at the Bureau of Reclamation, highlighting what the challenge is. Like, you go to look for climate information and there's 695 different data sets that you could possibly explore. And if you're a water manager, you don't necessarily have a lot of time to devote to just understanding the climate change risk element. And so that can really make you pull your hair out. And part of the reason there's so many different ways of evaluating climate impacts is there's many ways in which we can go about using models and connecting models. And so there's a lot of different pathways which lead to a lot of different results, which moves the science forward, which is fantastic, but it also is important for us to remember that certain methods and models are more appropriate for certain questions, certain spatial and temporal scales are more appropriate for certain questions. Some knowledge might not be possible to answer, or some questions might not be possible to answer with current knowledge, and that calls for kind of increasing savviness of the consumer, so the information user. It calls for better approaches to managing the scientific information, and also calls for appropriate guidance. And so here's another way of thinking about this. The water managers are often unsure what information to use and how to use it, and the scientists often are unaware of how their information is being used. And so this project was looking at how can we go about changing that. And so when we talked with water managers and researchers, it was really hard to pinpoint exactly what and how things should be used, what that guidance should be, but there was a lot of saying, oh, don't use it for this, don't use it for this. So we started to collect those don'ts and realized a lot of those don'ts could also be framed as do's. And so we gathered together and then organized a collection of do's and don'ts for understanding how to go about using climate information in water planning and management. I'm just going to share with you quick examples, and there's certainly, if you want more, plenty to share. But the first do is to understand how decision is being evaluated. Do understand how the decision being evaluated is important to the model selection. So understanding what the question is before you start going and selecting what approach you're going to use, because whether you're looking at the size of facilities for sewer overflows or the frequency of drought, you're going to need a different set of tools. So to make sure your approach is fit for purpose. Another of the do's is to think about additional considerations. So determining what level of detail you need that fits your needs and resources. And that has to do with kind of what tools you use in the modeling space, but also importantly, the additional considerations of how much it costs, how long it'll take, to what extent the analysis will improve the decisions, can appropriate data and information be obtained, who will undertake the analysis, and how much information can your system or your organization manage. So those are important elements that I think is important for water managers to recognize as they embark on designing their study, but also really important for scientists to realize there's all these other elements that are really important in creating actionable, usable climate information. So a quick summary of the do's and don'ts. It's intended to foster two-way conversations. It's designed in layers with quick take-homes and then underlying research pointers. It's transparent, version controlled, it's on GitHub, and it's intended to promote a community effort. The first version is out. The second version, which is more focused on model selection, is coming soon. So the second project that I'll talk about is leading practices in climate adaptation. So the Water Utility Climate Alliance has been around for over 10 years. They're a group that have been really innovative in thinking about how to incorporate climate science into their operations and planning. And they wanted, in celebration of their 10-year anniversary, they started a project on leading practices in climate adaptation, where they wanted to gather and share their experiences to develop and implement climate change adaptation more effectively, and to develop a set of leading practices that were grounded in their experiences, and to spur innovation within and across utilities and with the adaptation community more broadly, somewhat parallel to the do's and don'ts, which is part of the reason I was brought on to the project. So our first task was really to define what climate adaptation actions are. And this was somewhat humbling for me because I was thinking it would be largely about understanding. And so understanding the climate science, understanding your system and your system's vulnerabilities, its risks and opportunities. But in reality, there's a lot more to it than that. There's engaging, so motivating action and engaging others and supporting them, developing climate messages. There's planning, so building capacity and planning for multiple futures. There's sustaining, so monitoring your system, developing funding, maintaining capacity, managing expectations, and then ultimately acting to implement the changes in your assets or in your actions. So these are all a part of the spectrum of what climate adaptation actions include. And so the wheel spinning in both directions, there isn't necessarily one particular place to start, and really robust climate adaptation includes elements from each of these. There's currently 40 different practices, which are kind of under development right now. So the one example is under the plan category. The leading practice is building in-house capacity. And this is understanding that climate work can be done within and outside of an organization, but implementation really requires there to be capacity within the organization. And it's better to do that through hiring or redirecting staff time, but not assuming people can add it to their existing workload. Each of the leading practices has examples from utilities. This one highlights Portland Water Bureau, which you may recognize some familiar faces here. They worked closely with the University of Washington and Oregon State University to think about building their in-house capacity. And so they wanted to update their climate and supply modeling with newer information and data. They incorporated downscaled climate data and ran it through a hydrologic model in the Bull Run watershed. And I think one of the really great things here is they used their relationship with the universities. They had a bake-off where they tried out several different hydrologic models and which one was most appropriate for their use. They worked closely with the civil engineering department at the University of Washington to do that. And then Bart was the lead on that project, and then took that model and really used it in-house and hired somebody to do the actual analysis in-house. So it was this great partnership that led to them being able to build in-house capacity. So the final example I want to share is work that I did with the AMS Water Resources Committee, and it was creating a perspective on hydroclimatic extremes as challenges to the water management community, looking at Oroville Dam and Hurricane Harvey. It was a group that included consultants, water managers, researchers, and folks from federal agencies. And the idea here was that attribution studies, when focused on water management concerns, can help water managers to navigate these record-breaking extreme events. That this is really illustrated by Oroville. So Oroville, the event that we all got to hear about in the news was a combination of both storm precipitation totals and temperature. The temperature in the watershed prior to the event played a really critical role in having the reservoir already filled. And then it also contributed to the speed at which the reservoir filled, the contributing area, because it was warm during that storm. And so thinking of not just the precipitation element, but the temperature, and the temperature going back in time and what that can mean to understanding the magnitude of the water management impact. Similarly, so no single storm in the case of Oroville, or no instantaneous precipitation rate in the case of Hurricane Harvey was to blame for the events that happened, but rather it was damages that were caused by precipitation that didn't stop. So in addition to changes in the instantaneous precipitation rate, which is really interesting meteorologically or climatologically, it's and can have a big impact on stormwater management, but really thinking about the duration and the storm totals are often more relevant to reservoirs and flood managers. And so again, this idea that attribution studies can help managers navigate this important paradigm shift if and how precipitation patterns are different if the questions are designed with the water management community in mind. And that requires improving and having those conversations. Here's a quote from Alexi, who's at San Francisco Public Utilities. The water management projects, such as dams, are optimized for design events of specific likelihoods, likelihood estimates based on historical records. Are these designs still valid? If not, how much are we wrong? And what are the potential risks for public safety? So again, attribution science can provide more informed context for understanding forecasts of extremes that are increasingly beyond historical experience. And so this is a great opportunity, I think, for our science to better inform management. So some concluding thoughts. I've provided 3 different examples of connecting science and decision-making. There are many different approaches, and climate science is one of many important considerations. And I think there are increasingly more opportunities to participate in stakeholder-driven research. So if you're interested, I want to conclude by providing an opportunity for you to become involved. So there's a lot of different opportunities at within universities that are fantastic. On the national and international level, there's increasingly more communities engagement around this space. The one that I have been a part of is at the American Geophysical Union, and really working on this idea of science to action, where the goal is to help communities thrive by increasing science engagement to improve daily life and better confront concerns posed by extreme events, climate and land cover change, and natural hazards. And it's done through scientists and decision makers working together to design, conduct, apply, and share research in a way that maximizes its value to society. So here is one way that you can go about participating. Participating in the Science and Society section. We have monthly Science to Action conversations. There's a Slack workspace. And perhaps most importantly, given the theme of this meeting of climate extremes and environmental equity, there's going to be a meeting within a meeting where we talk about kind of convergence, collaboration, justice, and the future of the sciences. And I think it'll get at kind of where environmental equity connects with community science or decision maker driven research. And I would welcome ideas and feedback and invite you to participate. And with that, I'll stop and I look forward to our discussion.